out.
Other problems surfaced. Basement furnaces filled up with water. Some were left homeless because of no power or heat.
Kind of sneaked up on us. It rained so hard, so fast. We've lived in our house, Luke, for 22 years. This is the second time we've had water in the basement.
Casey's not alone. Countless basements are flooded. Homeowners work quickly to pump the water out, but the flooding was too intense.
Look at it spouting there outside of the house.
This is a flood that hits like every 25, 30 years. This is the worst one we've ever seen down here.
Randy Black and his family lost everything at Lynn's Crossing. He is not alone.
It just seems once you go, you just don't have any control anymore. You're afraid to come back and find out what you've lost.
But there's more at stake than just the loss of property. The potential for loss of life loomed like the gray sky across Pennsylvania. State emergency management officials were cautiously optimistic.
Jen, have you heard anything with regard to any injuries or fatalities as a result of this flooding?
Fortunately, we have not heard of anything. I hope that that is an accurate assessment of what conditions are, not just lack of communication.
State officials have no way of knowing just how bad conditions are.
Well, just follow the tracks up along the edge here. They go up.
A jet skier becomes a lifeline for this Claysburg family, waiting to be plucked from harm's way.
In Bedford County, a man clings to a tree for several hours. An Army chopper lifts him to safety.
A 16-year-old girl spends 25 minutes in the rushing water in Jugtown, Blair County. Hers is a happy ending after being whisked to safety by jet ski.
What a day and what a
Hour by hour, the situation worsened. Roads in and out of Saxton underwater. No one could leave or enter for 24 hours. Vans and cars in Patton Township submerged in murky floodwater.
A barking dog senses something terribly wrong, and the chilling first-hand accounts of the widespread devastation.
People are literally on the rooftops clinging for life.
At 7:30, there was nothing. At 9 o'clock, my basement was full.
Some rock slides, Route 144, Center Mountain, and it was blocking traffic, really difficult for people to get around.
I figure anywhere from 1.5 inches up to about 3 inches unofficially. That all fell in about a 5-hour period. And if you stop and think about it, had it been a January snowstorm, we're looking at 3 feet of snow in 5 hours.
Things would only worsen. By Saturday morning, a number of confirmed deaths are reported statewide.
In all, nearly 20 dead across the state, including 2 from Blair County and 1 from Bedford County.
The weekend brings a flicker of light in the form of state assurances that help is on the way.
The governor arrives in Bedford for a look at the damage.
When it's you, your home, your family, your trailer, your business, that is a national natural disaster.
The Army Corps of Engineers calls it a 75-year flood. The pictures tell the whole story.
In a matter of hours, floodwaters leave a path of destruction that extends to every corner of the state.
Left behind are the lives lost, homes destroyed, and chilling reminders of how much we sometimes take for granted.
Hope to see you on better circumstances next time I fly in, all right?
Gab, every time you see that, it gives you chills. Those pictures are just incredible, aren't they?
And we left with Governor Ridge saying he wants better circumstances, and he spent a lot of time criticizing public officials for not getting federal aid a lot faster.
Absolutely.
That's something we're going to look at a little bit later.
That's right. Up next, the flood hits home.
A closer look at the damage in your town when we come back.
Because of you, 10 News is on the move to Saturday mornings. You want all the latest highlights from Friday night's action, all the scores, plus a look at the key games for the weekend. 10 Sports delivers your only weekend guide on 10 News Saturday morning. The news way to start your weekend.
With my itchy, flaky scalp, I need 2 hands for itching and 2 more for flaking.
Now all you need is new double-action Scalpicin. It helps stop deep scalp itch and dandruff, too. Scalpicin is not a shampoo. It's a clear liquid you don't wash away. Starts working instantly to get under the dandruff with a medically proven medicine these dandruff shampoos don't have. New double-action Scalpicin.
No more flaking, no more itch.
Scalpicin helps stop deep scalp itch and dandruff.
The Dodge Magnum Power Surge. It's your chance to get up to $3,000 in savings.
Why would anybody give someone they don't know
Who has this power? You do. Today, the National Guard and Reserve make up over half of our defense forces. So when your employees need time to serve, give them the freedom to protect ours.
Welcome back. Years from now, the flood of '96 will be remembered for the widespread damage it caused.
Big town, small town, tiny community, it didn't matter. The flood hit home, and it seemed to touch everyone in some way. Depending on where you live, the damage was either minor or very severe. We now take you on a tour of the damage and devastation in our region, beginning with Brooke Wagner in Altoona.
Early Friday morning, runoff water started rushing down 18th Street in Altoona and into basements.
At 7:30, there was nothing. At 9 o'clock, my basement was full. Clear up to the first floor.
18th Street was one of the city's most flooded areas. As firefighters went door to door to check basements for hazards, the water crept up to their knees.
This is probably the worst. I've been in the fire department for 30 years. This is the worst I've ever seen flooding. Even in '72 when Agnes came through here, there was nothing to compare with what we have today.
I came this morning, and of course the water was already, I started up 18th Street, and I just kept, further up I came, the deeper it was getting. I'm like, oh my.
As basement after basement filled, furnaces filled, for many there was no more heat. As the day wore on, the temperature dropped rapidly, and by mid-morning it was time to evacuate.
We got to get out. We don't have any choice. They shut the gas and the lights off and told us we have to evacuate.
While residents were gone, police sent a message to would-be looters.
We have brought in extra police patrols. Uniform officers will be assigned to these areas. As the people are taken to the emergency shelters, we will be here to protect your home and your properties. So a fair warning to anyone, don't come into this area unless you're authorized, or you will be arrested.
By the end of the day, the water was already receding, but it still gushed from a broken sewer line and into a barricaded intersection. Even before the rain and snow stopped, residents were trying to get their lives back to normal.
What else can you do?
Brooke Wagner, 10 News.
I'm Charlotte Ames. Folks in the Lynn's Crossing area of Frankstown Township in Blair County have almost come to expect flooding.
Oh, it's very, very bad. I know there's quite a few properties down there that looks to me like they're really, really totaled. I mean, I don't even know whether they're livable.
But residents were to learn that this time the rushing waters took more than their material possessions. 17-year-old Walter McChesney was on the way home when he was caught up by water overflowing the banks of the Little Juniata. Rescuers tried repeatedly to save him, first with a jet ski and later an Army helicopter.
He was up on a post, and the helicopter came in and dropped the rope to get him, and when he hung on the rope and he went loose.
Dwayne Chamberlain's son discovered the teenager's body Saturday morning.
About 4 o'clock, they came across saying that they were rescuing somebody on the road, and I said, that's my bear. And it was torn off him.
When residents learned the McChesney family had no insurance to cover this tragedy, they quickly set up a fund to help cover funeral expenses. But it may be a while before members of the McChesney family are able to rebuild their lives without Walter, and their neighbors are able to reconstruct their homes.
I'm Christina Orangio in Center County. The rain came down hard and driving was nasty for folks traveling here along College Avenue and State College. At least they were moving. These cars were at a standstill along Route 144 in Center Hall. Water came pouring down the mountain, creating a rock slide. Crews couldn't get rid of the debris quickly enough.
The bank is quite steep, and it washes out one place, and we take care of it, and then it washes out another place, and we've got to go take care of that.
And in Pine Grove Mills, the water covering streets was so deep, kids couldn't get home on their own. So they hitched a ride in a front end loader, and that trip was a shaky one. But those living closest to area creeks had it the hardest.
And the water line would have been about right here.
David Bagley of Central City Milesburg had 8 feet of water in his basement. The Bald Eagle Creek runs behind his home.
Mentally, you're just, wiped out by the end of the day because you're moving things, trying to save what you can, and then you have to leave and hope for the best. By the time you get back, you hope everything is at least, at a point where you can deal with it.
And dealing with it wasn't easy. Flooded out basements became all too common.
Started right out around the side of the house, and I knew I was in trouble.
Firefighters have been working around the clock, hooking up hoses and pumping out people's basements, and they're putting that water back right where it came from.
We have a list, but every time we go somewhere, the neighbors are coming out and say theirs needs done.
It was a similar scene here in Spring Mills. Home after home was partially flooded, and the damage went beyond the basement for many in Coburn.
2 foot lower than what it was in '72, but it's still bad. I mean, it's, once it gets up on the first floor, it's real bad. Up in the floor here, cots, everything saturated, electric stoves gone.
Lots of things had to be tossed out because of the flooding, and cleaning up the mud seemed endless. Eventually, the water level came down in Penns Creek. Left behind were images of the flooding frozen in time. In the end, many folks were counting their blessings despite the damage.
We went through a fire in our life, and well, we went through a flood in our life. But as long as no lives are lost, that's the main important thing.
I'm Tim Boyles. When you hear the word flood in this area, most people immediately think of Johnstown. Now, that city did receive some flood damage, but was not the hardest hit in Cambria County. In Tanneryville, floodwaters near Cooper Avenue slammed into this bridge. Firefighters stood by helplessly, unable to do anything but watch, wait, and prepare for the worst. In Hyndman, this home was one of more than 350 in the county that was damaged by floodwaters. Most of that damage, however, was limited to basement flooding. A mudslide on Route 403 held up traffic. A backhoe struggled to clear both mud and water from the road. The Stony Creek River peaked at more than 22 feet Friday afternoon, the Little Conemaugh at 14. Fire whistles blew in Patton Friday evening, calling emergency crews to work. Water here topped the banks of the river walls, spilling into neighboring homes, swallowing up cars, creeping up around vans. Several businesses around Benz Creek here were heavily hit by floodwaters. This Riverside Market, as well as the neighboring Benz Creek Pharmacy, received heavy damage.
Well, first I thought of leaving town, but...
Owner Bob New ultimately decided not to, but to face the damage head-on. He and his crews started their cleanup immediately, trying to get back in business as soon as possible.
And that's exactly what happened. Now, the store's owner says not only did the employees help clean up, but also their parents, their grandparents, their cousins, their nieces, everybody helped to pitch in to clean up this store. They did so well that by 9 o'clock Monday morning, this place was open for business.
After a few days, the water had subsided to just a trickle. People's anxieties about it had not.
Well, we can't very well jack the place up. I think I might retire a little quicker than I was earlier planning, but not much we can do. Just pay our insurance and take our chances.
I'm Kelly Tuthill. The worst of the winter flood may be over, but folks in Huntington County know their work is just beginning. At the Ames-Bilo shopping plaza, floodwaters rose to as high as 5 feet and left behind a muddy mess.
When I walked in, I just could not believe with my eyes. It was just like a nightmare you see on TV, where it always happens to the other guy and not to you.
This time it did happen to them, to a Chinese food restaurant, to a beauty salon, and to a bookstore. Magazines, books, and videos destroyed. Thousands of dollars of merchandise turned into a muddy goop.
It is very hard for the people that work in the store. I mean, I just had to send some of them off a little bit because they were just getting overwhelmed with it.
Overwhelming is a good word to describe the mess, and the cleanup is monotonous. Employees carried out damaged goods, cartload after cartload, can after can.
It's going to take a miracle to get us where we need to go at this project, but we will be here. I guarantee you, we will be here.
I'm Christy Hobley in Bedford County, the first county in the region to declare a flood disaster with arguably the worst damage. Near the county fairgrounds, roads became raging streams. At Camp Sunshine, homes became virtual islands. The only way to reach many people was by boat. This couple in the Narrows area of Bedford County was taken to safety. Their home by the Juniata River
was lost in the flood. This was the scene at the Kenton Bridge. Floodwaters barreled through where a peaceful river once flowed. Floodwaters leveled the mile-level trailer court. The next day, the destruction was evident. A dozen mobile homes were ripped from their pilings. Some were nearly flipped completely over on their roofs. By looking at this stop sign in Saxton, you'd think a tornado rolled through. In places where there was once one creek, there are now 3 or 4. These are pictures from Hyndman, possibly the hardest hit community in Bedford County. This is what floodwaters did to Zane Bagley's home.
It's been home for 40 years, and now there we lost it all in a matter of hours. It's going to have to be destroyed. And then I'm going to have to eat the loss and try to go on from there on fixed income, but it's going to be hard to do.
It seems like everyone in Hyndman has their own horror story. Once treasured belongings were piled high, covered in mud, and waited to be taken to the landfill. Bucket by bucket, residents worked to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Heavy equipment was brought in to tear away the wreckage.
There's a lot of frustration, a lot of hurt, you know, to have to clean up again, and some maybe are moving. But most of the people that live here are tough. They work together.
After all the water, the damage, the suffering, the cleanup, heavy hearts say they don't know how much more they can take.
I'm not going to live close to the creek no more. I'm getting away from the creek. I've lived here all my life. I love the creek. I played in the creek, but not now. Enough's enough.
So many lives affected by that.
It's a type of natural disaster that affected so many people in some way or another.
Well, at every corner of the state, no question about it. You know, from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, everywhere in between, the entire state deals with flood damage.
Including the governor, who publicly attacks the president over the handling of the disaster. We'll have those stories coming up as we look back at the flood of '96.
How many different cups can...
When you can't get to a TV, check out 10 News and Storm Tracker weather on the radio. Tune to WZGO 105.7 and 1470 AM for 10 News at 6 every night.
My father was always a better mechanic than a hitter. But when he led his team to the championship, the whole town believed it was nothing short of a miracle. So when the game was won, then lost on account of blindness, well, it was as if the whole world stopped dead in its tracks. Some things take a long time to understand. Like what my father did for that umpire after the game.
Be the first. A message from the Credit Union Foundation and your hometown credit union.
By no means was central Pennsylvania the only region hit by the flood of '96.
This was a statewide disaster. 18 people died in the flood, and state officials put the damage in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Places like Williamsport and Wilkes-Barre-Scranton were very hard hit.
So were the state's 3 largest metropolitan areas. The pictures tell the story. The city of Pittsburgh saw some of its worst flooding in decades. Large ice chunks filled the city's 3 major rivers, submerging vehicles and grounding barges. Large part of Point State Park was underwater for a few days. Three Rivers Stadium was also threatened for a time when floodwaters filled the parking lots. Residents living along the rivers could only put up sandbags and pray.
In Philadelphia, ice jams in the Delaware River helped push the water 6 to 10 feet above flood stage. A 10-mile stretch of road that runs along the river had to be closed, and thousands of people were forced to leave their homes for higher ground. Thousands were also forced from their homes in the Harrisburg area as the Susquehanna River overflowed its banks. One of the most memorable pictures from that city, this pedestrian bridge, or what's left of it. The 106-year-old bridge collapsed at the height of the flood. Even the governor's mansion got hit. Workers there had to move furniture to higher ground because of rising waters. Now, that was probably the least of the governor's worries.
Absolutely. As millions of dollars in flood damage continued to mount, There was growing concern across the state over who would foot the bill. As Kevin Flanagan reports, early in the flood recovery effort, officials in Harrisburg and Washington were at odds.
The one point everyone could agree on, the recovery from this massive flood is going to be expensive, and state officials were demanding help from Washington.
I hear a lot in Washington these days about feeling everybody else's pain. Well, I think they ought to get off their bureaucratic behinds and come up and see the pains on the faces of the people who've lost their farms, lost their houses, lost their trailers, lost their businesses.
The governor's strong reaction came in response to a White House declaration that only 6 counties in flood-ravaged Pennsylvania were eligible for federal disaster assistance. This limited promise of financial help angered the governor, who was in our region inspecting flood damage in counties not yet eligible for federal help.
I'm hoping that the folks in FEMA get the message. It's real, it's statewide, it's affected hundreds of thousands of people in very real terms. This is to Pennsylvania as a severe earthquake or hurricane is to other. We're not complaining about a little flooding and a little snow.
The pressure from Harrisburg was being felt in Washington. At one point, the White House press secretary, Mike McCurry, accused the governor of waging a public relations campaign over flood assistance. In a live interview with 10 News, Governor Ridge agreed with that charge.
We've got 500 roads in repair, 8 bridges down, 30,000 structures imperiled or lost. We've got devastation across the state. Mike can say whatever he wants. He knows I'm promoting Pennsylvania's interests. We got their attention. Besides, dealing with him won't give us any more aid. We'll deal with the Secretary of Transportation, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and hopefully get all 58 counties included.
The Pennsylvania campaign for flood assistance was getting some attention. While floodwaters across the region were still raging, a high-ranking delegation from Washington was on its way to the Keystone State. Among those making the trip to our region, the Federal Secretary of Transportation. After an air tour of the devastation, federal financial assistance was promised.
And we'll do whatever is necessary to make sure that people's lives are restored and that we'll respond quickly to the needs that people have.
Another member of the delegation, the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
And we're going to do everything we can to help them to recover and rebuild. And I talked to the president twice yesterday about Pennsylvania.
After a delegation of Pennsylvania officials visited the White House, President Clinton declared the entire state a disaster area, clearing the way for families and businesses to apply for federally backed low-interest loans and grants. But the push for federal dollars did not end there. With flood damage to state roads and bridges expected to total over $500 million, county, township, and municipal leaders say they cannot afford repairs on their own. Again, political leaders say they're going to bat for the region. While touring a special disaster recovery center in Bedford County, the chairman of the Congressional House Transportation Committee says he's convinced more funding for road repairs will be made available.
However, I am assured that the other counties that are eligible will be designated. This is simply a matter of the paperwork catching up with what everybody's trying to do.
Schuster says he expects the federal government to eventually pick up about 75% of the flood damage repair work on Pennsylvania highways and bridges. Still, considering the amount of damage, that work could take several years to complete. Kevin Flanagan, 10 News.
And just a footnote, Governor Ridge did call lawmakers together to discuss how to handle the damage. However, he did not call a special legislative session on the flood. If he had, it would not have been the first time, by the way. The late Governor Milton Schaap called a special session back in 1972 when the state was hit hard by flooding caused by Hurricane Agnes.
And like the governor said, this was like an earthquake in Pennsylvania, and we heard so many people saying, I can't believe this happened to me and this happened here.
Absolutely, and that declaration by the president for the entire state could not have come sooner, I'll tell you.
Welcome relief.
Yeah. There's much more to come here on this one-hour special on the flood of '96, including a look at some truly heroic efforts during the flood.
First, some help from the Red Cross and a story about neighbor helping neighbor when we return. Sanders
Welcome back. As flood victims looked for shelter and began to clean up, friends reached out to friends, neighbors helped neighbors.
But there were also strangers helping people they'd never met. 10 News reporter John Sanders tonight on the helping hand of the Red Cross.
As the rains fell and the waters rose, the American Red Cross went into action. Volunteers staffed shelters, giving people with flooded homes a place to live.
We were flooded out of our house.
How much water?
They say about between 4 feet, 3 or 4 feet, something like that.
Then, when the cleanup began, the familiar symbol was still there.
Hey, mop and broom and some cleaning stuff for you.
Boy, that'd help, I tell you. Volunteers loaded their cars with the supplies people would need to recover and delivered them to flood victims who'd lost just about everything. But disaster was so widespread, relief so needed, the Red Cross was left asking for help.
This time is when we need volunteers to come and help. You know, the Red Cross is there for people, but it takes people to make the Red Cross work too.
Have you started your own cleanup and repairs?
But their effort didn't stop there. In fact, it's still going on tonight. Now volunteers are staffing service centers where flood victims can apply for help. Money with no strings attached. A gift made possible by donations to the Red Cross.
This operation is going to cost in excess of over $6 million, so we are going out on the appeal to ask for the community support.
Some volunteers say working with so many people who've lost so much is starting to take an emotional toll. They're looking forward to the chance to rest and recover, but they know the next time there's a need for help, they'll be back to do it all again. John Sanders, 10 News.
Hundreds were helped by the Red Cross in the days following the flood. But as you've seen, Red Cross volunteers weren't the only ones who helped the victims.
That's right. Countless friends and neighbors were also there to lend a helping hand. Christina Arangio has one such story from Center County.
From the looks of this flooding, it's no wonder this home in Pine Grove Mills took a beating. The driveway looked more like a raging river. And the worst part was that the owner, Scott Kreiner, was across the country when the flooding hit. Luckily for him, his friends stepped in.
We know some people here in Pine Grove, and they called us up and said, get down to the house. It's floating away.
The water rose quickly in Kreiner's basement. It was as high as the windows. And the force of the water was so strong, some of it managed to escape through the cement walls around the back of the house. But things were worse out front.
Took the whole foundation out.
A gaping hole remained after the basement wall caved in, but Kreiner's friends did what they could to stop the water from getting into the house.
We're just helping this guy out.
What have you been doing?
Well, we built the wall up in the front here to divert all the water down. And we busted the windows out of the house to let the pressure go out.
There were like 5 or 6 other people that came throughout the day that give me a hand while I was trying to get back.
This is what Kreiner was left with. His backyard looked like a dump site, but up close were valuables like these irreplaceable photo albums. They were destroyed along with these VCRs, computers, and televisions that Kreiner intended to repair. Are you covered for this kind of thing?
No, homeowners doesn't cover any type of water damage or anything like that.
Inside the basement, things were a mess.
Like right here.
Wow.
It pretty much covered the water heater. The furnace was completely covered going into the inlet.
Despite the damage, Kreiner says he's very grateful a group of friends came to his aid in his absence and once he returned.
So we had to dig out all the mud and all the cement blocks and put up these supports in order to, because that was supporting the whole front of the house.
During the intense flooding, there was about 5 feet of water trapped inside this portion of the basement. And Mr. Kreiner says if it wasn't for his friends who were able to get inside and knock a small block out of this door to let the water out, things would have been a lot worse.
So I had no front wall of my house no more, and there was the possibility of it collapsing, and losing everything else.
Kreiner has had to deal with more than $10,000 in damages to his basement, but he was relieved that the rest of his home was salvaged. He says he owes it all to his friends.
Oh, it was fantastic knowing that you have friends like that to keep an eye on your stuff, even though you didn't have to ask or call or,
Oh, that's amazing. You know, and there are a lot of stories, countless stories like that from all over the state. People just springing into action to help each other out.
And without the help of those people, it could have been a lot worse, as Christina said.
Absolutely. Well, no doubt those stories show that the worst of times can bring out the best in people.
And it certainly did in this area. Coming up, you'll meet some folks who are now regarded as heroes. You'll hear their stories of bravery and courage and see the incredible footage some will never forget. Welcome back to this Flood of 96 special. When the water began to rise that Friday morning, calls went out for help all across the region.
Those who answered that call were those we depend on to handle crises: police officers, firefighters, and ambulance crews. These men and women, both paid and volunteer, left jobs, home, and family to block off roads and bridges, check homes for flooding, and rescue those who could not get themselves to safety. The work was wet, cold, and dangerous, but they did it without complaint, even when they found themselves in need of a push or a pull or even just dry clothing. It was a display of an old-fashioned willingness to pitch in and help, the kind of spirit that gives our region its sense of community. Now, putting yourself in dangerous situations is part of the job for emergency personnel. It's something they come to expect when disaster strikes.
If that's not your job, you may never know when you're needed to help save a life. It was a surprise to a local student who was asked to help the morning of the flood. By the end of the day, he was being called a hero.
19-year-old Eric Malone had saved 5 people from the floods, and the rescues changed his life forever. Reporter Kelly Tuthill has the story.
I thought it would be a normal day. It turned out to be a very exciting day. Around 10 o'clock, we got a call from the fire department that some people were trapped in their homes, and they wondered if we had any ability to rescue them.
They got one jet ski over here, Donnie. They're going to try to come over.
Eric Malone's father owns Keystone Kawasaki. Their jet skis are used for rescues on Raystown Lake.
I went over and got all my clothes and everything, and we then went to the site. I didn't think it'd be a very difficult job. There was a little bit of a current, moving about 30 miles an hour.
That current was strong enough to prevent other rescue crews from reaching victims. That's why firefighters called in Malone, a world-class jet skier.
The hard part was getting people on the ski and getting them safe to shore without them losing their balance.
Malone managed to carry a woman, 2 children, and a firefighter to safety. Just as he was starting to catch his breath, another call, another emergency, just miles away.
The second rescue involved an older girl that was trapped, holding on to some trees in the water, and I kind of had to pull her up with help from her on the ski, which is a little more difficult, maneuvering the ski with my right arm and pulling her up with my left.
Malone pulled 16-year-old Lisa Lingenfelter out of the water. She had been stranded in the icy Juniata River for more than 25 minutes.
I want to thank him for it, too. Saving my life, that was nice. Because you never know, I might not have been here today.
Later, the day turned bittersweet for Malone. There was one he couldn't save.
I'm starting to feel a little bit better. It was a little tough the first 4 days after it happened. After things go on, I hear more positive things about the parents.
The mother of 17-year-old Walter McChesney knows the jet skier and others tried desperately to save her son.
We just appreciate everything he's done for us.
Since the flood, many people have been calling Malone a hero. He says all the attention has been overwhelming.
I go to Penn State, and I had some people stop me and ask me if I was the person that saved the 5 people on the jet ski. And at times I wanted to say, no, you got the wrong guy. I was just out there to help the community and do what I could do to help.
Malone has won lots of medals for his jet skiing. Now he thinks all the training was leading up to something bigger, something much more important.
After this was all over, I had time to sit down and think about this, and people mentioned to me what I was really training for was to rescue these people. It'll be one day I'll remember for life.
Kelly Tuthill, 10 News.
Well, several days after the flood, the Blair County Commissioners honored Malone for his service to the community.
During the disaster, there were times rescue crews couldn't get to the victims, and neighbors became the heroes. That's what happened in 3 Springs, Huntington County. When the water started rising, Jennifer Glunt put her 3 kids in the car and headed to town. She didn't realize how fast the water was flowing. Before she knew it, the current pushed her car off the road and into a flooded field, filling her car with water. That's when neighbor Rodney Fraker and others heard their screams and waded through the icy water to save the Glunt family. We're happy to report tonight that everyone was pulled to safety. All during the flood of '96, there were dozens of life or death situations across the region.
Things got so bad, members of an Army aviation support group based in Philipsburg were called in to help with the rescues. In many cases, they were the difference. Paul Alexander has the story of G Company and one of its toughest assignments ever.
For many people that were left stranded by the rushing water, the only option was an air rescue. A helicopter just like this and 3 others got very much involved in the rescue effort for the flood of 1996. The 30 members of G Company here in Philipsburg were very much involved in the rescue efforts, and at least 65 people are very glad that they were.
We've seen a lot of things that were pretty shaking, in the back of the aircraft. I know for certain that there were entire families that we evacuated.
The crews worked straight through the night, about 27 hours without a break. There were times when the crew felt they couldn't keep going, but they didn't have a choice.
And they would respond that if we don't remove them that night, the chances are they wouldn't be there in the morning.
It was the most demanding and intense mission anyone at G Company could remember, but it was also the most gratifying.
I've had 20 years of aviation experience, and I have to say this is the most rewarding mission I've ever been on. And I think I speak for everyone, again, even those back here in the rear, knowing that there's lives out there saved, made it worthwhile.
This is very gratifying to be able to go out on a mission like this and to know that you save children and you save families. You brought families out of their homes intact.
Not only were the victims in grave danger, the chopper crew's lives were also hanging in the balance.
Everywhere we went, the devastation was pretty bad. The water was high. It was rushing, extremely fast. And then the freezing temperatures compounded the problems.
Before it was all over with, we had 4 aircraft, flew over 35 hours. We're able to rescue some 65 people. There's no doubt in my mind that there's people out there alive today because of the efforts that we were able to accomplish.
The ages of those rescued range from 4 months to 75 years. And the most rewarding aspect of all, from G Company's perspective, is that they had a 100% success rate. Paul Alexander, 10 News.
Gabe, there were so many of those types of stories from all over the state, acts of heroism we didn't even hear about.
No, we didn't, and there was some cases, people risking their own lives to save other people, so they really deserve a lot of thanks tonight.
Absolutely.
When we come back, success stories, local towns where flood prevention projects worked.
And the ongoing fight for people in another area to stop the constant flooding in their community. We'll be right back. Or simply pitched in to help their neighbors.
But there were other success stories involving flood projects that prevented even more damage. David Price takes a look.
6 feet. Like most of our area, Clinton County residents felt the worst the floods could dish out.
We tried to get up what we could in a few hours, and eventually the water overtook us and forced us out. We left with the floodwaters licking at our heels, and we're driving off to higher ground.
Oh, it came in in the windows, and I got out of here. They took me out in the backhoe.
But officials say the raging waters could have caused significantly more damage in Lock Haven if it weren't for the controversial dike levee.
It worked. There's a lot less devastation in the county, and there's a lot less work for my people now.
Floodwaters created plenty of work, though. Some 600 homes didn't have heat because of flooded-out basements and damaged furnaces, but it could have been worse.
I think the perception is that Lock Haven has been protected by the dike levee, and everybody is, and I'm very happy to say that, but I believe that everybody's forgotten about the rest of Clinton County.
I've been told that there'd be a lot of areas in the Lock Haven that would have had first floor flooding, and there would have been, many with basement flooding.
This was the first major test for the dike levee. It was completed in October 1994 after years of criticism of the project, but it brought welcome relief in troubled waters.
It's a mess. That's a junk pile over there. You can't even get into, you know, do anything really.
David Price, 10 News.
In Cambria County, a 40-year-old flood control project did its job.
That's right, the job to hold back the west branch of the Susquehanna River. A dike and flood wall were built in Barnesboro after a series of disastrous floods in the 1930s and 40s. The levee kept river water away from a clothing factory and out of the West Branch and Railroad Street neighborhoods, but people still had to be evacuated as melting snow and runoff came downhill to puddle up against the levee. The town's baseball fields sit inside the mile-long dike. They were covered by 4 feet of water. Local leaders say without flood control, damage would have totaled well over $1 million. Still, this flood unfortunately just added to the frustration in at least one local community hit hard by the flood. You'll see the Linz Crossing area of Hollidaysburg is no stranger to high water.
And residents there feel like David fighting Goliath in the struggle to get their community some help. As Carolyn Donaldson tells us, they're again left with damage and demanding action.
I don't know what they put a price on life, but to say that it wasn't worth cleaning up doesn't make sense.
Walt Laird is angry. He's been fighting for a long time to get this river cleaned up.
Now, this is the type of debris and buildup here along the banks of the Little Juniata River that Laird and his neighbors have been fighting for too many years to have removed. Now, with the loss of human life here, they're hoping that action and not more studies will be taken.
Laird and his group, COUGH, or Citizens Opposed to Frequent Flooding, have seen study after study done and tons of dollars spent.
Since I started this project in '93, the Army Corps of Engineers have studied it, Pennsylvania DER studied it, and they've spent a lot of money studying it. And the cleanup that we were finally going to get didn't amount to the cost of one of them studies that I could believe.
Just last week, Laird had gotten right-of-way agreements from residents to have the river behind them cleaned up. Conrail had also just signed the papers to include some of the land that they owned. It all washed away on January 19th.
The debris that clogs up there builds a dam until it gets enough force to bust loose. Anybody knows if you're pouring water out of a glass into a pop bottle, you can't pour it in as fast as you can pour it out.
Laird feels newer development on Frankstown Mountain has played a role in this long-time problem.
When you don't have ground saturation due to concrete, it runs off to the river. None of us are against development, but the end result is that the new people up there in Stonehenge and Sylvan East and everything are high and dry. The people that have lived here for 25 and 30 years are taking the brunt of development.
Some might question why these people stay after continual poundings.
I'm sure that there's some that economically can't move. But there's far more and increasingly more every year that choose to live here.
Those residents want action now. Blair Emergency Management Director Ray Weimer is trying to get that done.
Our biggest problem is we're going to get down there and widen the channel so that the river will stay within its banks.
Weimer's forming a task force of residents, county and township folks, and state DEP officials. Up till now, money has been a big stumbling block, especially for small Frankstown Township.
And it won't actually cost the township anything per se in cash, but in-kind management we might look at. We're going to work on it and see what we can do.
Their next step is to find new and different ways of funding, including conservation and river management assistance and using volunteer help. Carolyn Donaldson, 10 News, Hollidaysburg.
Yeah, you know, central Pennsylvania, the entire state, gone through a heck of an ordeal. But
Sure.
you know, I mean, after, you know, the rebuilding and the cleanup and so forth, it's a long, long road yet.
It sure is, especially for those folks who are getting continual flooding. We sure hope they get some action.
Absolutely.
When we come back, we'll wrap things up with some memorable sights and sounds from the flood of '96.
But first, what was the last major flood to hit our region? We take you back to some pictures from 1977, when the city of Johnstown was devastated by a midsummer storm. It was the third biggest flood in that city's history. Water reached 11 feet in some places, 85 people died, and damage topped $300 million. We'll be right back.
Help solve local.
With a story that affected our entire viewing area, we at 10 News needed help getting it all covered. we called on our stringers, the folks who live in your hometowns and shoot news stories for us on their home cameras.
These people did yeoman work for us, and we want to say thanks. In Blair County, Corey Canarsa shot floodwaters in the Lakemont area. Bedford County was well covered. Robert Shirley worked that area. Ron Giffen shot in and around Hopewell, while Tom Dixon and Sam Ritchie handled Saxton and the Broad Top.
In Cambria County, Keith Bailey gave us early pictures of the Patton area. Andy Kubanda traveled from Johnstown to Ebensburg, shooting flooded streets and streams, and Larry Hammond took care of the high water in Barnesboro.
Wes Walcott shot videotape for us in Huntington County. John Laird went out in the wet in Clearfield County. And last but not least, we used John Wirt to cover the flood in Clinton County. Our thanks to all of them tonight.
Absolutely.
Well, this flood was many things to many people.
Above all, it was a memorable event for us here in central Pennsylvania. 10 News photographer Jody Gill put together a collection of sights and sounds from the flood of '96. We leave you tonight with some of those lasting images. I'm Luke Michaels.
And I'm Gabrielle DeRose. For all of us here at TV 10, good night, everyone.
I got this one.